history, in service, in sisterhood, in the community with Tau Omega.
Greetings. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated Tau Omega Chapter, in conjunction with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, seeks to reduce the shame and stigma of mental illness. For more information and joining this effort, please visit the NAMI website at www.nami.org. October is National Domestic Awareness Month, and the first week of October is Mental Illness Awareness Week. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources, one of the most common causes of homelessness for children is domestic violence by mothers and/or the children themselves. Trauma also places children and mothers, women, and children at risk for mental illness. Tau Omega in the Community presents a panel discussion on this topic of domestic family violence. Our panelists today are Dr. Millicent Freeman, Director of Outreach and Training for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Dr. Freeman holds a PhD of Psychology Counseling Specialization. She received a Master's in Health Education and a Bachelor's of Science in Health and Physical Education. Dr. Freeman is also an adjunct professor at BMCC. It's good to have you, Dr. Freeman.
Thank you.
Today we have Terry Lewis, who has a Master's in both Social Work and Urban Affairs from Hunter College, and is affiliated with the National Association of Social Workers and is a member of the Graduate Urban Affairs and Planning Association. Hello, Terry.
Hello.
Next is Dr. Aisha Langford, Assistant Professor at New York University School of Medicine, Department of Population Health. She holds a PhD in Health Behavior and Education from the University of Michigan and an MPH in Behavioral Science from St. Louis University and a BA from UEA. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you.
Last we have is Sean Henry, who is a graduate from Penn State University with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's of social work from NYU. He works at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs and is a clinical social worker. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you.
I am Andrea Webster, president of Tau Omega Chapter Alpha Kappa Alpha, and I'll be serving as your moderator this evening. Let's get started with some questions. The first question I have for you guys is, what are some effects that family violence and domestic abuse have on women and children and their mental state?
So I think that one of the effects is that you will have some isolation. Women and children can isolate based on the experiences with violence. Also with children, they may find inappropriate ways to address anger from what they may see with the violence at home. And, you know, it could also go into other things like anxiety, depression can also be affected by witnessing violence.
I'd like to add to some of the specific issues that arise for both women and children that have been exposed to violence in the home or in the street repeatedly. These children also have academic problems. They have internalized stress. So if you can just imagine constantly being at a heightened state of constantly thinking about, is something going to happen? They don't sleep well. They don't eat well. They might overeat. They might undereat. They become a behavior problem in school. The schools just pinpoints them as the problem child without really investigating what's going on in the home. Then they become the classroom problem. So it's constantly having all of these issues going on. So it presents a snowball effect in the life of the woman as well as in the life of her children. And isolation is one of the key issues. They hide what's going on, which makes it difficult sometimes. Until you see the physical signs, you really don't know what's going on.
Also to add, I think it affects their self-concept on how they self-differentiate out of those situations in their interaction with their peers, other family members. That's why we see this aggression in terms of diagnosis at a later stage. So I think those are some major factors that could contribute to those type of problems in a household setting.
And I will also say, as someone who works in health and with the health system, sometimes you'll see physical ailments present. So sometimes the children or the mother may have headaches or stomach aches or cramps or pain, different types of things that are related to the trauma, related to the stress, related to the anxiety and the depression. And so you can have physical things manifest just by being exposed to this type of violence and trauma.
So actually, a child could be actually being treated medically, but it's actually more psychological in nature.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay. So let's move on to another question. Teens, children, and even some adults are not being bullied and intimidated at school, but are becoming victims of cyberbullying. Why do you believe this is happening, and what are some of the causes?
Sure, I'll start. I think one of the challenges of being in 2016 is that we all have so much access to the internet. We have access to apps on our phones. We have access to social media, and we literally have access to electronic means 24 hours a day. And it makes it easier for people to be bullied, to be attacked, to be harassed through online means or through texting. And that's a big change than, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when we did not have these gadgets and we weren't connected in such a way. And that's a challenge now of how to really intervene on that, and how do we stop that when we have this relentless access and ongoing cyberbullying.
And just to add, yes, it's definitely a challenge to today's society with the new technology in terms of monitoring it. We see that it's a form of people, how they big themselves up, and how people, it's a form of a get back. And then we look at the infamous case in 2010 with Tyler Clementine, which he was bullied, taped by a roommate without his consent, and then it was posted on social media. And as a result, he ended up committing suicide, jumping over the George Washington Bridge. So these things that we have this technology, but then now it's being taken advantage of. So it's really a hard challenge to get a grip on it, of where we're at today in society.
I just think that with the internet, the anonymity, to be able to hide behind the screen and hide behind a screen name, and not really be held accountable. Whereas in the past, you may have been bullied at school and you can identify who is bullying you. Now you can get someone can write a message or send you an email or make a phone call or whatever, and you may not know who that person is. So there's less accountability now because of the anonymity, and it allows people to kind of get away with things, whereas in the past you weren't able to.
And you can easily reach out and touch someone without having them know who you are.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's move on. So let's stay on social media. We currently live in a state of constant communication, specifically through social media. What role does social media play within the conversations about violence in the community?
I'll take a stab at it. I think it says a lot. Now we have these negative images are not the appropriate images that these youth or adolescents are seeing, and they're going and acting on it, and they're not able to actually differentiate the reality of it. It gives them a sort of a blunted sense of reality, and if there's no monitoring in terms of what a child is watching, then these responses could be negative. And these are the things that we discussed earlier. We need some regulatory monitoring, some accountability to make sure that we're having some positive programming. Therefore, we can alleviate some of the cyberbullying or the shame name calling of what we have today.
I think the other thing that I've been seeing a lot is people are sharing these clips of videos of violence in the McDonald's, on the train. So looking at violence has now desensitized people, and they think that it's funny. I think that we really need to take this, if you see something, say something, and take back over the internet. If you see something, say something, shut it down.
And I'd like to interject to give kind of a positive side. I think social media can be used to bring people together, to organize, to raise awareness about very important issues like cyberbullying and domestic violence. With Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all these other great tools that we have now, it's another vehicle to really shine a light on these issues and to bring people together in ways that we weren't able to do, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. For example, I know the CDC has a Stop Violence initiative going on right now through Twitter and through Facebook. There are other organizations and celebrities who are speaking out against youth violence, against cyberbullying, against all kind of violence. And so I think, like any other tool, depending on how you use it, it can be very negative or it could be very positive. And I think for concerned citizens like us, we have a responsibility to share those websites and to share those hashtags and to think about innovative ways to use social media to bring positive change.
Definitely, I definitely agree. I find more young people will forward and share all of the negative things on social media before they share anything positive, and it's the older generations who are the ones sharing the positive information, but we're the minority here. So how do we change that?
I think the celebrities, that's a good point. Getting celebrities to buy into changing the message and sending a positive message and their lyric. You see, young people move to the beat, but it's the lyric that's planting a seed in you. So we need to get them on our side. Many of them are, and they're posting also because they're also being the victims of social media and cyberbullying.
Yes, they are, totally. So now let's change the pace a little bit, and let's talk about violence towards homeless. What impact and what type of violence does this have on a community when those are attacking homeless people?
On a community,
Is it increasing or decreasing?
I think it depends on the community. Let's be honest. There are some communities that have come forward and said they don't want a homeless shelter in their community. And therefore, if they see homeless in those communities, wherever they are, in the segregated parts of New York City, they do exist, we see that there is an increase in violence. Now, does that violence always be physical? No. Sometimes it's verbal abuse. And we see that on the increase. We have a responsibility as citizens, as residents, to say something, to come together with churches and social organizations and fraternities and sororities to say, not in our community, not now, not on our watch, and change the social climate so that that's not the norm to be jumping and beating up someone who's homeless. I'd like to even bring up the issue of LGBTQ youth that are homeless, because so many of them are homeless and they're being victimized and they're being bullied and they're being tormented and they're being sex trafficked, and that's got to stop. And the only way that that's going to stop is by making advocates come forward and our elected officials come forward. Whether they vote or not, you have a responsibility for the constituents that are in that area, living in that area, and visiting that area.
I think, addressing the stigma of homelessness. I think in recent years, with all of the tragedies that we've had, hurricanes, and it's not just a poor person's issue. Any one of us can become homeless at any point. So understanding that being homeless is not just because you don't have money. And once we start addressing things like that and really kind of leveling the playing field, I think that's a beginning to addressing the issue of homeless people being stigmatized. Yes.
And I would also add, I really appreciate your chapter for just raising the issue, period. I think sometimes people just don't really know how extreme or how big a problem is because they may not see it they may not choose to see it, or they literally may not see it in their neighborhoods. And so I know that there were some stories running a few months ago about the crime in the homeless shelters, murders happening in the homeless shelters, people getting hurt, things stolen, and that was because that's not my field directly. I never knew that it was that dangerous, literally, sometimes to be living in a homeless shelter. So I think literally just having conversations like this with coworkers and friends about these issues, just to raise awareness, because everyone's busy, everyone's really focused on their lives, and you may not always have the knowledge or the sensitivity to actually care about these things because you may not know how extreme they are.
And just to add, I think I would like to thank you guys as well. Just the variety of different problems that's in one shelter. You may have someone that's experiencing mental illness, substance abuse, or whatever types of factors in there. And I think also substance abuse plays a big role that we need to actually address more in terms of sometimes when you get these communities being discriminated or these anxiety factors, that these create these acts of negativity. And I think that if we address them and then we some kind of way advocate through our politicians and our stakeholders for more units to differentiate, to have DV shelters or substance abuse or for mental illness, and that way it can alleviate and we can find some stability in terms of getting mental health services for those with stable housing.
No, I totally agree with you. I believe it starts with education.
Yes.
And especially the ones who are victims and those who are being victimized. They don't know where to go, what to do, or how to respond. So they're the victims, and then they're being victimized, and the cycle just continues. And there's no end. So it takes a village for us to do this and kind of bring it to light and try to find some resolutions and try to find some resources for these individuals who are being victimized on a daily basis. So with that in mind, how can we as civilians make our communities safer? What are some useful resources for those affected by domestic violence?
The mayor's office. The Family Justice Center is wonderful. There's one in every borough. They have supports in place. There's free legal services. There are a number of agencies, I think even the one that you're part of, provides free counseling in one of the sites. There's services in all different languages. And if they don't have someone on staff to speak that language, they're part of the language bank. There's the Anti-Violence Project for gay, lesbian, and transgender, both adults and adolescents. There's the DOOR for adolescents. The CDC website has links. The New York City Department of Health has links. There is the district public health offices that are now hubs within every community has a number of resources. So there's websites, and it would be good if we could even have them at the end to scroll them, because people might forget how to link to them. But most links you can get either through the nyc.gov and also cdc.gov. They'll link you if you put in a zip code, and it'll link you right back to services. Also, there's heightsite.org. So there's numbers of websites that are around.
And I would also say there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is available 24 hours a day, and you can get connected to resources at any time. And I would also say, in terms of just being involved, I think it's important to note that there's a lot of ways to be involved. Some people donate time, some people donate food, some people donate clothes. If you don't have time or products to give, you can also write a check. Find an organization that you trust, that you like. Maybe it's local, maybe it's at the state level, maybe it's national. But you can also support these organizations financially, because frankly, a lot of times that's a challenge with providing these services, especially if it's a nonprofit organization, that the financial piece can be difficult to fundraise each year to keep providing services. So remember to write checks.
I think
Write
the
checks, yes.
I think the advantage that we have now is, just the internet. You have access to the internet, and there's so much information there. You Google something, and you can pull up so many resources. And that safe spaces, creating those safe spaces. I know with the VA, intimate partner violence is something that's on the agenda to address, because there's a lot of veterans that are coming back who are now having relationship issues because of being away from their families. So finding those safe spaces, 911, 411, libraries, hospitals, all of these are resources that we can tap into.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. What about those individuals who are in it and can't get to those resources? They don't have access to the internet. They can't go into the library because they're so in it, they don't see their way out of it. So how do you reach that person?
There are a number of churches in New York City right now that have support services, that have counseling. If they can't get to one, they can get to one that has the door open. For those churches that operate Sunday only, I suggest that they try to partner with one of the community-based organizations if you have space. There are funding sources available now to expand the service onto or into a community-based or a faith-based organization. There's one at Bethel Gospel Assembly in Harlem on 120th Street. They have a crisis center. CCC out in Brooklyn. There are a number of churches that have counseling services that are open Sunday through the following Sunday and have access to all the support services that are in the community. Some of them are even partnered with the NYPD, and so therefore, if they need to get emergency services or NYPD involved, and then get that person to safety, because that's the critical point.
Right.
They have to be ready.
Yes.
And you have to ensure that they're going to be safe, and they have a plan for safety that you can ensure that both the women, the children, and also men. We can't forget
leave them out. Can't leave them
men
out.
are also victims of intimate partner violence, and so support services that are community-based and faith-based are critically important.
I think being supportive as well. I mean, you know, we mentioned earlier, if you see something, say something. You don't necessarily have to say something outside if this person doesn't feel comfortable with you sharing, but at least say something to them. Become knowledgeable about what signs of intimate partner violence.
Right.
Know those signs. Create that safe space for the person that's going through it, the victim, and empowering them to make those decisions to go and get help. I think a lot of times people don't feel comfortable going and sharing with somebody that they don't know, but they'll share it with someone who's close to them. And they're just really looking for that support to say, hey, you know what, I'll hold your hand through this. And if we can be more empowering and more supportive as a community, I think that's helpful as well.
And I would like to add, just definitely utilizing your congressman, your assemblyman, your assemblywoman, you know, of actually putting visual aids around so people can be more in tune to know if they don't want to report it, they can see the visual of dialing 311. They can see how they can report something or get safety. So I think that, you know, the politicians in our community as well has a well of knowledge and systems that we can utilize in our communities.
Education is critical, though, because you raised a good point. If someone doesn't know that they're being victimized, and it starts off subtly, it doesn't always start with a push or a shove. If someone is like clocking your phone, like I tell my students, if they're clocking your phone and asking you who you're talking to, they're not paying that bill. They shouldn't be doing that. It starts off subtly like that. How much money do you have in your pocket? Why? A push or shove might come way later on. So intimate partner violence, it's a broad, and it starts off very subtly. And even having someone call you out your name, it can start off there. It reduces that person's self-efficacy. But again, it could go back to if they were partnered or with someone, or if they witnessed it growing up, it becomes normal. Their self-efficacy is so reduced that they don't even realize that they are potentially becoming the victim themselves of what they witnessed as a child.
And I would say it's really important to talk about prevention as well. I think one of the things that churches can do, sororities can do, other organizations can do is to have sessions and workshops on what is a healthy relationship? What does a healthy friendship look like? We have, well, there's not a pastor here right now, but we have, you know, psychotherapists, and they're all kind of professionals that can help talk about what healthy relationships should look like, what they are. I think things like premarital counseling, all of those things that you can do in theory early on to help teach people, because they don't always have a reference. If their reference was their parents' marriage or their home growing up where there was violence, that is their reference point. And sometimes people don't know that there actually can be another way and that they're all alternatives. And I think that's where our organizations come in, our universities come in, our sororities and fraternities, that we have another way to intervene, not just when someone is beat up or hurt or homeless, but we can do this on the front end by having these conversations.
Okay, so let's kind of wrap up and kind of get final thoughts and final words from everybody on this panel. We'll start with Sean.
Well, again, I think that with the internet and creating safe spaces, you know, those are important things to do and establish, and to be proactive. I think we're in a society that's used to being reactive, and oftentimes it's too late. So if we can be proactive and share information, create those safe spaces for people, and communicate and be responsible for one another, that's important.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, and I would say just to, as concerned citizens, to be aware of what's available. You may not always be able to intervene yourself or to give time yourself, but you can write a check. And I think it's important to know that if someone is in trouble, to know where you can refer people or what resources you may be able to connect people with if you yourself are not comfortable or equipped to intervene yourself. And I think that's really important, to know what's available and to be able to connect people to resources.
I think knowledge is power. For all these positive programs out here and the things that we know that's available for us to utilize, I think it's very important for us to know what's available, to educate ourselves, to see the signs, to be able to help, to be on the front line, and to be able to, you know, decrease the numbers of the domestic violence or any violence in our communities.
Connecting people to resources, knowing what's out there. Take the time to walk into these buildings, into these churches, into these mosques, find out what they offer. If you can't write a check, you can at least be educated. And take the time to talk to people, just talk to people, and sit back and listen to and watch how they respond to you. If they are looking at you, if they shy away, and then know how to just be an empathetic ear and be accountable to each other.
Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you all taking the time coming out this evening to discuss domestic and family violence and also the homeless issue that we're experiencing here today. I would like to thank our panel, Dr. Millicent Freeman, Terry Lewis, Aisha Langford, and Sean Henry, and myself, Andrea Webster. Thank you for another episode of Tall Mega in the Community. Have a good night. Thank you.